Story 1. This all happened last year during a solo road trip I had planned from Minnesota to Wyoming. Most of the route was utterly empty. After the first hour leaving the city and before the last stretch entering a small town, it was just endless forest, scattered hills, and the occasional stretch of open farmland. By the time I reached the western part of the state, I was driving through truly remote territory. I had planned to drive through the night and most of the next day, instead of splitting it into 2 full days and staying at a hotel along the way. I figured it would be tiring, but worth it to save time and money. I started around 7:30 p.m., double-checked that my car was packed, and had snacks and water within reach. The first hour took me through suburban streets and small towns, but soon the roads opened up. Traffic was almost non-existent, and there were barely any places to stop except a gas station every 50 to 60 miles. After a couple of hours, I noticed I had barely used a third of my gas, but I still decided to top off before hitting the most isolated stretch. After a long search, I found a tiny station tucked along the side of the road. 4 pumps, no other cars, and the convenience store lights were off. I parked, started pumping, and noticed the gas was coming out painfully slow, almost a minute for a single gallon. I leaned against the car and tried to zone out. A car appeared on the dark road. At first, it seemed like they were just passing, but then they slowed, reversed into the station, and parked right behind me. My first thought was that they had missed the entrance, and they needed gas. But as I glanced over, I noticed the man standing next to the car. Tall, wearing a dark green flannel and worn black jeans, he was staring at me, not just looking, but locked onto me, almost like he had been waiting. I awkwardly smiled and looked away, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. After a long, tense minute, he grabbed the pump and filled his tank. I felt a flicker of relief. I finished pumping, locked my gas cap, and got back on the road. His eyes had this heavy, dull look, like someone who had been awake for days but was still fueled by pure adrenaline or caffeine. Weird, I thought, but I shrugged it off. Hours later, it started raining. It was just past midnight, and the rain made the drive mentally exhausting. I opened a can of energy drinks, snacked, and tried to keep my eyes open, but by 3 a.m., I needed a break. My gas was also getting low. Eventually, I saw another station, a small flickering light in the middle of nowhere. I filled up, parked near the store, and checked my phone for weather updates in nearby towns. There were none. Absolutely nothing. I decided a 20-minute nap wouldn't hurt, hoping the rain would slow down too. When I woke, the rain was still hitting the roof. I sat up and noticed a car at one of the pumps. My stomach dropped. It was the same one, the same gray-green car, the same man. But he wasn't anywhere visible. No one inside, no one outside. My face went pale. Where was he? I didn't want to stick around to find out. I started the car and put it in reverse. But as I looked at my rearview mirror, I froze. He was in my back seat, eyes glaring in the dark. My instincts kicked in. I slammed the car into drive, threw the door open, and bolted into the woods. I didn't hear him move. I watched from the shadows as my car rolled back a few feet. Then he drove off, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. I realized my phone was still in the dashboard. Heart pounding, I approached the car. The man had left his own vehicle behind, unlocked, keys in the ignition, groceries in the back seat. On the floor of the passenger's seat was a phone. Locked, but I could still call from the lock screen. I didn't understand at the time, but this wasn't just random. This was a stolen car. Everything in it belonged to someone else. He had done this to others, but I had been lucky to get out mostly unharmed. Investigators later told me he probably didn't plan to reveal himself at the gas station. He likely wanted me to drive for a while before confronting me, and who knows what he would have done. He was never found, and neither was my car. Even now, driving alone on long stretches of empty roads, I can't shake the memory of those dull, piercing eyes staring at me through the dark. Story 2. This happened last January, during a quiet evening when I had the night off. I live in a small cabin-like house in a forested part of a tiny town, about 20 minutes outside the nearest city. I was planning to relax, maybe watch some TV after a half day at work. Around 6 p.m., I got an unexpected call from a friend. His car had broken down, and he asked if I could give him a ride and maybe grab some food on the way. I didn't hesitate and said I'd be over. We'd done this before, so it wasn't unusual. I grabbed my jacket, keys, and stepped outside and froze. There was a man standing literally on my porch, just a foot away. He wore a bulky coat with a black scarf covering the lower half of his face. He didn't flinch, didn't react, just stood there silently. For a second, I felt embarrassed for jumping. But curiosity immediately took over. Before I could speak, he muttered an apology, saying he had been about to knock. I nodded, asked what he needed, and he hesitated. Then he asked if I was someone, David or Daryl, something like that. Not me. I said no, and he simply said okay, and started walking away. I locked the door behind me, making sure he left the driveway before I got in my car. Still, the encounter stayed in my mind during the drive to my friend's work. My neighborhood was isolated. People don't just walk up to houses here. I picked up my friend, grabbed a quick bite at a small diner, and drove him home. By the time I returned, it was around 8:30 p.m., and snow was falling lightly. Inside, I warmed up, sank into the couch, and lost track of time. Hours later, when I got up to stretch, I remember the man. I went to the door, peered through the peephole, nothing. The night was calm, snow drifting gently, wind minimal. Then, out of the corner of my eye, something moved across the driveway. I opened the door for a better look. Shoe prints in the fresh snow led all the way from the road, stopping near my car, and then disappeared into the shadows of the yard trees. My stomach dropped. The thought of the man returning filled me with unease. I called the police, explaining the situation. While on the line, I kept hearing faint, subtle noises, but each time I paused, they seemed to vanish. The operator likely thought I was imagining things. Then a loud thud against the back of the house made me jump violently. Another thud followed, heavier this time. Someone was at my back door, moving, striking, trying to force entry. The operator instructed me to hide or escape. I grabbed my keys and ran for my car. The open yard felt dangerous, but thankfully there was no one else waiting. I got inside and drove off just as the police arrived. By then, the back door had been forced open. Watery shoe prints marked the floor, but no one was inside. All I could give the officers was a description of the man I had seen on my porch. There was no proof it was the same person. He was never found. Even now, thinking about that night unsettles me. It happened on an ordinary day. Nothing in the world indicated it would. And knowing that he could be out there still makes me feel like I'm just waiting for it to happen again. Story 3. I was in my sophomore year of college, trying to balance classes, part-time shift, and side gigs. Babysitting became one of my more reliable ways to cover car payments and random expenses. 3 or 4 evenings a week, I'd watch kids for families around town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and I liked the routine. For about a month, I had a regular job watching a 5-year-old boy once a week. His parents were polite and soft-spoken, almost a little guarded, but friendly enough. Every time I came over, they'd leave around the boy's bedtime, usually close to 7 p.m., and return 4 or 5 hours later. My tasks were simple: make sure the kids stayed asleep and that nothing went wrong. The pay wasn't bad for what mostly amounted to sitting in a quiet house by myself. On this particular night in late January, I arrived around 7:10 p.m. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the cold air, dusting the ground and making everything outside look hushed and distant. I parked in the driveway, slung my backpack over one shoulder, and knocked on the door. The father answered, greeting me softly, while the mother slipped on her coat behind him. "The little one's already down," she told me. "Should be an easy night." I smiled, nodded, and stepped inside. They thanked me, repeated the usual instructions, then left in a hurry. I didn't ask where they were going. They had mentioned once or twice that they liked to drive into the city. I always assumed it was date night or something private. I set my bag down in the living room and did a quick walkthrough of the house, which had become a habit. I checked the kitchen, back door, hallways. Nothing out of place. Satisfied, I sank into a cushioned chair, scrolling through my phone. Babysitting was always more about waiting than doing. Maybe 45 minutes later, my phone buzzed. The mother's number lit up the screen. I answered quickly, thinking something must have happened. But she only asked if I had just called her. "No," I said, confused. "Why?" She explained she had just gotten a call from an unfamiliar number, and when she answered, no one spoke. She wondered if it might have been me using a different phone. I assured her it wasn't and that everything at the house was fine. She sounded a little unsettled, but accepted my answer. After hanging up, I brushed it off. Parents worried this was normal. Still, something about the timing stuck in my mind. Another half hour passed quietly. I was halfway through a video on my phone when beams of light cut across the living room walls. Headlights spilling through the cracks of the blinds. At first, I assumed it was a neighbor pulling into their driveway. But after a minute, the light didn't move or shut off. Curious, I stood and peeked through the blinds. Parked at the curb was an old, beat-up dark gray sedan. The paint was faded, the body dented, and the windows tinted far too dark. My eyes adjusted, and that's when I saw him. A man stood near the sidewalk a few feet from the car, facing the house. Facing me. His posture was stiff, hands hanging at his sides, head tilted slightly upward as though studying the windows. I froze, gripping the blinds between my fingers. My pulse quickened. I didn't know if I should confront him. This wasn't even my house. After a tense minute, he turned, walked back to his car, and got in. Relief started to seep in, until I noticed how slowly he pulled away, his headlights dragging across the tree line like he didn't want to leave. Far down the road, the car stopped. The lights stayed on. Then click, they shut off. I lingered by the window, waiting, half expecting him to return. Minutes passed, but the night grew quiet again. My nerves buzzed, but I told myself it was just some confused visitor who'd mixed up the house numbers. Eventually, I went back to the living room, though my eyes kept darting toward the blinds. An hour slipped by. Maybe two. I had the TV on low volume, something mindless playing in the background. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the heater and the occasional creak in the walls. My eyes felt heavy, drifting in that half-sleep state where you're not awake but not fully gone either. Then a sound. A light thump, faint but real. My eyes opened. I sat up listening. For a moment, nothing. Then again, a little louder this time. Thump. I stood slowly, straining my ears. My first thought was the boy. Maybe he had gotten up, restless. I walked toward the stairs, heart thudding. But as I crossed the hallway, movement caught in my peripheral vision. I turned my head. Through the glass of the back door, a man was standing there. His hand gripped the handle, yanking it back and forth, testing it. His face was shadowed, but I could see the shape of his eyes, locked onto me the moment I looked his way. The second our eyes met, he pulled harder, the handle clattering against the doorframe. My chest tightened. I bolted upstairs, heart racing, trying to keep my steps quiet even though adrenaline surged through me. I rushed into the boy's room, scooped him into my arms, whispering for him to stay calm. He stirred, confused, but thankfully didn't cry out. From downstairs came heavier sounds now. Not just the jiggling of a handle, pounding. Thuds reverberated through the house. He was using something, maybe a tool, maybe his shoulder. Wood groaned, hinges strained. My throat went dry. With a boy in my arms, I hurried back down. As I reached the front hallway, a sharp crack split the air. Plastic, metal, something had given way. My stomach dropped. I turned just in time to see the back door burst open. The man stepped inside. His features burned into my memory, even though I only saw them for seconds. Average build, dark hair, casual clothes, sweater, jeans. But in his right hand glinted a knife. And he didn't hesitate. The second his eyes found me, he charged. I clutched the boy, tighter, and sprinted for the front door. I threw it open, frigid air rushing in, and bolted outside. Behind me, I heard his shoes pounding against the floorboards. My car sat in the driveway like salvation. I yanked the door open, shoved the boy inside, and scrambled into the driver's seat. Just as I jammed the keys into the ignition, he reached the window, knife raised. The engine roared to life, and I reversed violently, gravel spitting beneath the tires. His face, cold, determined, knife still clutched, was the last thing I saw as the car tore away. I drove until the houses blurred into empty fields. Only then did I stop, trembling, and call the parents. Then the police. By the time they arrived back at the house, he was gone. The back door hung broken on its hinges, and wet footprints marked the floor. But no intruder. No car. Nothing. I told the officers everything. The sedan, the man, the knife. They took notes, asked for a description. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't lead anywhere. What unsettled me most wasn't just the break-in. It was the aftermath. The parents thanked me that night briefly, but after that, they stopped contacting me. No explanation, no follow-up. They never asked me to babysit again. Messages went unanswered. It was as if they wanted to erase the entire incident. Out of unease, or maybe obsession, I started digging. I searched public records, local news, anything I could find. All I uncovered was that the mother had been married once before. Her ex-husband looked disturbingly similar to the man who had stood in that doorway. I can't say for sure it was him. I can't say for sure what his plan was. But in my gut, I believe he wasn't there for me. He was there for the boy. It's been years since that night. I don't babysit anymore. Sometimes I tell myself it was just a twisted coincidence. But whenever I close my eyes and remember the sound of that back door splitting open, I know better. That man came prepared. He knew they wouldn't be home, and I don't think I was the first house he had watched. And maybe not the last. Story 4, it was a Tuesday night, one of those nights where I had nothing planned except to waste a few hours online with some friends. Since my divorce earlier that year, my routine had become painfully simple. Work, come home to the empty house, and try to distract myself with games or videos until I passed out. Most nights it was just me and the glow of my computer screen, and though I'd never admit it out loud, the silence of the house sometimes felt too heavy. That evening, storms had been forecasted. Not unusual around here. Every other week the weather app pinged me with some flood or wind advisory. Still, I noticed the air felt charged when I got home, the kind of prickling in the air that usually comes before lightning. By around 9 p.m., I was mid-match with a few buddies when the first big hit came. A blast of wind slammed against the siding, so hard my window rattled in its frame. The whole place shuddered, and I instinctively pulled off my headset. Rain lashed against the glass, and the beams of the old house groaned like something alive. I was about to tell my friends about it when my screen flickered. The lights across the house stuttered too off, then on again. It was just long enough for the panic to sink in, but my PC was still connected, so I tried laughing it off. "You guys hear me?" I asked, but before I got an answer, everything snapped into silence. The monitor went black. The hum of the computer cut off. The house died around me, sinking into a suffocating, absolute dark. I held up my hands and couldn't even see my fingertips. I fumbled along the desk until I found my phone and switched on flashlight. Irritated, I decided to check outside from the front window. Through the sheets of rain, I could barely make out shapes, let alone tell if my neighbors had power. Most of their houses looked dead too, but at that hour, plenty of people were already asleep, so it was impossible to be sure. I messaged the group chat to say I was done for the night, then used my little light to head toward the basement. I remembered keeping an old backup battery pack down there, the kind you could plug a lamp into. As soon as I stepped down into the cool, damp air of the basement, I froze. I thought I heard something. A faint scrape, like cardboard sliding. I swung the beam of my phone toward the shelves and saw nothing but old boxes, warped from years of moisture. The storm outside roared louder as if mocking me, so I brushed it off as my imagination. I hauled a heavy battery pack upstairs, managed to hook up a lamp in the living room, and felt at least a little better with some light around me. I've always hated sleeping during outages. Something about the silence and darkness feels too unnatural. So instead of heading to bed, I pulled open the blinds and sat on the couch scrolling through YouTube on data, keeping one eye on the storm. Maybe an hour slipped by before curiosity got me again. I cracked open the front door and stepped onto the porch. The overhang kept most of the rain off, and I leaned against the railing to watch. Across the street, I noticed something that didn't sit right. A couple of homes still had lights burning, which meant the outage wasn't widespread. Only my house was dark. That chilled me. I pulled out my phone and looked up the outage map, but nothing new had been posted. Then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. A new text popped up from an unknown number. "Downed lines in your area. Expect extended outages." The wording was strange. No company name, no automated code. Just a plain text, like something you'd get from a friend. My gut told me it wasn't right, but I ignored the warning bell in my head and went back inside. I sat on the couch, listening more than watching as videos played softly from my phone. The thunder outside rolled long and deep. Then, clear as day, I heard it, one wooden creak, unmistakable. It came from the basement steps. I know my house. I've lived in it long enough to recognize that exact sound. I stood, phone light trembling slightly in my hand, and crept toward the hallway. The storm outside illuminated the windows in flashes, and for one brief second, I saw the basement door. It was standing wide open. I stopped dead in my tracks. There was no chance I'd left it like that. Not after I'd just been down there. My flashlight beam shook as I angled it down the stairwell, but all I saw was black. No movement. No sound. I shut the door quietly, trying to reason with myself, but unease had already seeped into me like cold water. I turned away, thinking I'd just double-check the back rooms before deciding whether to call anyone. That's when it happened. From behind the closed basement door came the sound of pounding feet, racing up the stairs. Heavy, furious footsteps shaking the boards. Instinct took over. I lunged, slamming my body against the door just as it rocked forward from the pressure. Whoever or whatever was behind it threw themselves at the wood, rattling the frame, hammering fists or shoulders against it in bursts. The impact reverberated through me as I braced with all my strength. There was no lock. Nothing but me holding it closed. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fumbled with my phone, trying to dial. The moment the call started ringing, the pounding stopped. Silence. Then slow retreating steps. Back down. Back into the basement. That was all the time I needed. I bolted for the front door, phone still clutched in my hand, and sprinted through the rain to my car. I sat in the driver's seat across the street, engine off, eyes locked on my house as I called the police. When the officers arrived, 3 of them swept inside. Minutes dragged on as I sat there shaking. Eventually, one came out and confirmed what I dreaded. The intruder was gone. They found signs at the back door. It had been forced open. The most disturbing discovery came later, though. That text message about downlines? The police traced it. It wasn't from the utility company. It came from a personal number, likely a burner. Whoever had been inside my house knew enough to cut my power and even had my phone number. They'd wanted me distracted, to think it was just the storm. They wanted me not to check the breaker box in the basement, because there hadn't been any outage at all. He had shut it off himself. No one was ever caught. No motive was ever clear. Just a night I'll never forget, and a reminder of how fragile the illusion of safety really is.